Our digital Our Digital Solutions Conference is designed to address the technology, operations, and communication issues that association industry professionals are facing in today's rapidly changing world. Over the next 7 hours, we'll explore a diverse range of topics from digital transformation to remote communications and from digital pricing to online engagement and more. I hope that you've had a chance to explore our Homebase platform sponsored by Map Dynamics. You can use Homebase to navigate today's agenda, learn more about our speakers, and access their handouts. During the breaks, I encourage you to visit the marketplace to learn more about our exhibitors and sponsors. Please say hello and thank you to them via chat feature in Homebase or here on Zoom. They're here to answer your questions about their products and services, so please do reach out. I hope that you'll join us for all of today's sessions, but if you have to step away, all the sessions will be available on demand after the conference from Homebase next week. So before we get started, I want to say thank you to a few people who helped me make this year's conference possible. Thank you to our education committee for all their hard work identifying topics and speakers for this year's conference. Nicole Bowen, Chair, Chris Knox, Christine McMichael, Amrita Nichols, Margie Nolan, Susan Sachs, Heather Sampson, and Alexandra Wesley. And thank you to our annual supporters for their year-round support of NESAE. Platinum supporter, your membership by Community Brands. Platinum supporter, D2L, Desire to Learn. Gold supporter, David Fox, photographer. And thank you to this year's exhibitors and sponsors for their support of NESAE and our conference, D2L, Desire to Learn, Growth Zone, Eventpedia, Nimble AMS, Halmar, Map Dynamics by Nextech AR, and Novi AMS. Thank you. I'd like to welcome one of NESAE's annual supporters and a Digital Solutions Conference sponsor to say a few words. Derek Levesque is Account Executive with D2L Corporation. Welcome, Derek.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I have to admit, it's my first time at a digital conference, so I'll try my best to make things work here. But no, I'll share my screen, and I just have a few slides, nothing too serious to start off the day. Just a nice little quote here from the D2L side. I'd figured I'd put a nice pumpkin spice latte for the fall weather that we're seeing here. And just to introduce ourselves, so throughout the day, you'll see myself, as Philip mentioned, I'm an account executive with D2L, happy to answer any kind of questions. Along with me, I also have my colleague, Paulina Peskov, who is on the line as well. She'll be in the D2L booth with me throughout the day. She's a solutions engineer here at D2L. So any kind of technical questions or fun stuff regarding the demo, she would be the best person to speak to. Paulina, I believe you're on the line if you want to add on to that. I never do her justice, so please add on to that introduction.
Thank you, Derek. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. As Derek said, we represent D2L here today. We're going to be hanging around. We're going to be at the booth, happy to answer any questions you have, and looking forward to the conversations. Thanks, Derek.
Perfect. That's it from my end, Philip.
Wonderful. Thank you again for your support, Derek and D2L, and all of our exhibitors and sponsors. Now I'm pleased to introduce the speakers for our opening general session, Maddie Grant and Elizabeth Weaver Engel, who will be walking us through the No BS Guide to Digital Transformation. Maddie Grant, CAE co-founder of Propel, is an expert cultural designer and digital strategist who focuses on helping organizations prosper through culture change. She has specific expertise in digital transformation and generational differences in the workplace. She has explored the evolution of culture in the digital age through her books, including Humanize, How People-Centric Organizations Succeed in a Social World, When Millennials Take Over, Preparing for the Ridiculously Optimistic Future of Business, and The Non-Obvious Guide to Employee Engagement. Elizabeth Weaver Engel, MA-CAE, is Chief Strategist at Spark Consulting. For more than 20 years, Elizabeth has helped associations grow in membership, marketing, communications, public presence, and especially revenue, which is what Spark is all about. She speaks and writes frequently on a variety of topics in association management. When she's not helping associations grow, Elizabeth loves to dance, listen to live music, cook, and garden. Maddie and Elizabeth are joined by Prabish Shrestha, MS PMP CAE. Prabish is a group executive VP at the Independent Community Bankers of America. He'll be sharing his own story of his organization's experience navigating digital transformation. So please join me in welcoming Maddie, Elizabeth, and Prabish.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Good morning, everyone.
you.
So there we go. Let me share my screen. Okay, great. So definitely make sure that you have your chat window open this morning, because we are definitely going to be making use of that chat today. As a matter of fact, we have our very first chat opportunity to kick us off, which is, of course, this is the No BS Guide to Digital Transformation. And what Maddie and Prabash and I want to know, kicking us right off, is where is your association in your digital transformation journey? So go ahead and let us know in the chat if this is something that you maybe haven't even really started yet, or if you're kind of exploring, you've maybe started work on a few program areas. Kind of give us a sense of where you are in your journey as we get going today, so that we have a sense of where the audience is, all the way from we haven't even gotten there to we've fully gone digital, halfway there. All right, great. Thanks, Phil. Go ahead and let us know. So once again, we are your presenters, Maddie, Prabash, and Elizabeth. And as there are three of us, we are going to be making active use of the chat, because we have at least two of us at any given time who can keep an eye on what's going on there. We want this to be a free-flowing discussion. We're going to have a formal Q&A period time at the end after we get through the remarks. But we can also be active with you in the chat. And if you post a really good question or comment in the chat, be ready, because we might ask you to unmute yourself and share it with everyone. So today's presentation is based on a white paper that Maddie and I released back in June of this year. It is the latest Spark Collaborative white paper, lucky number 13 in my ongoing series there. And you can download it for free at the link in the slide. We'll pop it into the chat really quick. And it's also in the handout for the session in the platform. So you can get it in any one of those ways. So Maddie does culture work, and I do membership strategy. And we're both kind of low-key geeks, even though neither of us does day-to-day tech work, at least not anymore. And what we noticed is that a lot of associations are putting increasing amounts of resources, money, of course, but also staff and volunteer time and attention into tech, and maybe not necessarily seeing the anticipated returns all the time. And so we set out to try to find out why. That's what the white paper is about. So this is what we're going to be talking about this morning. First of all, like what is digital transformation? There's a lot of definitions floating around out there, and so sort of how do we think about digital transformation? Why does it matter? What is it that makes association digital transformation efforts and projects unique? What role does technology play? This is a bit of a spoiler alert. What role does culture play? Then we're going to interview Prabash about what's going on at the Independent Community Bankers Association, Independent Community Bankers of America. And then finally, we'll get into very practical, like, okay, we've convinced you. How do you actually get started? What should you do first as you're looking to transform your organization? Okay, so what is digital transformation, and why should you even care about this in the first place? There have been many definitions of digital transformation that have been floated, and a lot of them have to do with kind of where the definer is standing. So if you ask somebody in marketing, they'll talk about using technology to reach members and other stakeholder audiences. If you talk to somebody in HR, they'll talk about using technology to manage people more efficiently and effectively. If you talk to somebody in IT, they'll be like, let's move everything to the cloud. And if you talk to somebody in the C-suite, they're probably going to focus pretty heavily on change management. And the thing is, those are all components of digital transformation, but they aren't the sum total of digital transformation. So what is digital transformation not? Digital transformation is not just adopting new tech, although obviously that's a piece of it. And many of you have had some experience with this, most likely. when you got some kind of like awesome, exciting new platform that was supposed to change everything, we assume for the better, of course, and it didn't. It's also, digital transformation is not, or at least not just, a digital first mindset. Thinking about how you can serve your audiences using tech and starting with tech is important, but it's not just digital mindset, digital first mindset. So Maddie has a great definition of what digital transformation is.
So my definition is that digital transformation is culture change plus vendor selection. So what that means is that it's actually the transformation part of digital transformation that's the most important. And so the simplest way to think about it is that you as an association, you have a goal in mind. You want to provide better value to your members, and you're thinking about some technology to do that. But you need to know what your end goal is first, and then you need to understand what changes that will require in terms of how you do your work internally and how you communicate with members. And then you can pick the right tools, right? So it's the actual change part that is the most critical, and that can really make or break the success of your digital transformation initiatives.
Okay, so then, you know, that's all great and helpful. Again, we've got a definition now. But why should anyone care about this, right? So when Maddie and I started talking to folks in preparation for writing the white paper, and kind of assessing where people were and what they were thinking about digital transformation, we heard some common objections. You know, and one was like, this is kind of dated. You know, haven't people been talking about this for a while? Aren't we past this at this point? Another one that we heard from associations is, hey, you know, the culture of the profession or industry we serve affects the culture of the association, and our industry is kind of old school. So we're not really sure we actually need this. Another objection we heard was, okay, sure, you know, Amazon and Apple and Netflix and all that, they're all great, but it's not fair to compare us against them. We're never going to have those kind of resources. And then, of course, you know, some people are like, we got it, we're already there, you know, no problem, it's totally covered. So the thing is, digital transformation has, in fact, been a thing for about a decade, but we can all see in our daily lives and associations that, broadly speaking, associations don't in fact already have this managed. Even if your industry or profession is pretty old school, because there certainly are plenty that are, your members' digital expectations of you aren't necessarily being set by the fact that they work in the field or in a plant or things like that. They're being set by their consumer experiences with people like Amazon and Apple and Netflix. And that's probably not fair, but it is a fact. And too many associations are trying to solve all this by slapping a technological band-aid on discrete problems as they present themselves, rather than thinking systemically, which relates to one more concept we want to share before we get into finding out what's going on with Prabhash's association, which is the concept of digitizing versus going digital. And if any of you are familiar with the work of Dr. Jean Ross, you already know these terms. So Dr. Jean Ross and some colleagues of hers wrote a book called Design for Digital. She's actually, she's spoken at some association tech conferences fairly recently. And, you know, she and her colleagues came up with this really interesting way of thinking about this, which is, you know, this idea of being digitized versus going digital. So the path to digital transformation starts with digitizing. So what is digitizing? It's modernizing analog back office processes and procedures using technology. So it's a precursor to being able to digitally transform your association, but digitizing is not digital transformation. The goal is to go digital. And Maddie and I had the opportunity to interview one of Dr. Ross's co-authors, Martin Mocker, in the process of writing the white paper, and he defined going digital, and I'm going to read this so I get it correct, as using technology to go beyond process improvement to creating customer-facing or member-facing programs, products, and services, innovating to solve customer and member problems you couldn't previously solve. So in other words, you don't need a mobile strategy or a cloud strategy or a social media strategy. What you need is a good organizational strategy that includes those things as you think about what you're going to build to help your members and other audiences achieve their most important goals and solve their most pressing problems. So this gets into what Maddie and I really feel is kind of the core or the heart of what's going on for association digital transformation initiatives, which is that associations are different. Associations are unique. A member of an association is not the same as a member of Costco, right? We both have members, we both call them members, but they have very different kinds of relationships to an association versus something like a Costco or a Sam's Club. And they have a different sense of ownership of an association versus something like a Costco or a Sam's Club, right? And that's a critical cultural impact. Also, our boards have a very different role than for-profit boards, and they have a very different relationship to our organization. So, you know, your board, they're your bosses, and in some ways they're sort of very direct owners of the association, but they're also end users. They're also customers or clients of the association. So all this complicates things in addition to, Maddie, are you coming off? You're still on mute, kiddo. There you go.
Zoom 101, the culture change piece. So this is where the rubber really meets the road. And when we have kind of roadblocks that hinder what we're trying to achieve with any kind of technology projects or digital initiatives, there are things like not communicating very well between departments, or hoarding information and data, or accountability is different for different groups. And those kinds of things are all culture aspects. They're not actually about the technology at all. And I'll give you a really good, simple example. So when I think every association here is probably trying to become more more data centric, right? So you likely have an IT team or person who's downloaded or using Google Analytics better and better every year. Over the last 18 months, you probably definitely have tried virtual conferences just like this one. And in a virtual setting, you have a lot more data now about exactly how much time people spent in different sessions, and which sessions were most popular and all that kind of data. You definitely have member-related data like transactional, what members are purchasing, what programs they're attending, what webinars they're registering for. You have registration data. So these are all standard association pieces of data, and you have likely more and more. And you also likely have, if you have different departments, you have each group that is looking at technology to improve that data. But what we find very, very, very frequently is that there's no kind of centralized way to look at all of that data and connect the dots between them. So, sometimes that requires a person to take on that role of digital storyteller, let's say, or just a centralized team who can translate the complicated, Microsoft BI reports into something that people understand. But the point is that if you're only using data in kind of separate silos and not able to dig insights and action from that data for the whole organization in a way that provides value to your members, that means that you are digitizing, but not going digital, to go back to the Martin Mocker phrase. So it's not just about buying the new technology that gives you all the data, right? And we all know this. We all, Google Analytics, I don't know how to use it, but I know it'll give me good stuff if I can find someone who can help me figure it out. But, taking that action on these different pieces of data is what it's all for. But that's the roadblock that we sometimes often can't get to. And that roadblock is usually culture roadblocks, not technology roadblocks. I can take a course in Google Analytics and learn how to use it, but that won't necessarily help me, translate it to different people in the association for their needs, so that as a whole, we can use this information to better serve our members.
Absolutely.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. No, and I was actually just about to type something in the chat that, like, tech skills are just the beginning of this, right? Like it's kind of like that's the fee for entry, right? You got to have the skill to be able to do this stuff, but that's not going to get you there all by itself. So speaking of, and Maddie and I also dealt with it in this order in the white paper, right? Digital transformation is culture change plus vendor selection. So, we start by talking about the tech, because that's really the easy part. And Maddie's going to talk about that again a little bit more in a minute. But yeah, so like when you're thinking about the tech part, the vendor selection part, well, what technologies should you be thinking about? Like what technologies are a part of or comprise the world of digital transformation? And there is actually a pretty recognized list for this. And that includes, AI, artificial intelligence / machine learning, everything from, things like chatbots to things like, using predictive algorithms. Cloud technologies, our IT definition there, where we said, let's take everything to the cloud, right? That is a piece of this. Data analytics, which is what Prabhash's story is about. The Internet of Things. So that's all those smart devices that are starting to come into our lives increasingly. Mobile technologies, still, of course, the social technologies, social media and social technologies, and the internet, like the web, your website, right? That is still a piece of it. And in fact, your website, even more so than 5 or 10 years ago, is your face to the world, your digital storefront. It's the first way a lot of people encounter you. So even though like the web is kind of the most mature of these technologies, it's also still a really important component. And the case studies in the white paper that we have address several of these particular technologies of digital technology directly. But the important thing to remember, and I'm going to keep stressing this, is you don't want an AI strategy. You don't want, an IoT strategy. You want a solid organizational strategy that perhaps, if it's appropriate, incorporates AI or IoT or these other things, if they're going to be good solutions for the challenges that your members and other audiences are experiencing, or the goals that they're trying to achieve. So, again, remember, the technology is the easy part. Then there's the culture change part.
Yeah, so in order to be able to truly affect your digital transformation initiative, you need to really understand where you are with culture, right? So at a very simple level, knowing that you need to provide some more skills to certain people when you're implementing a new software, that's one example. But there's many other ways in which culture can really play a part. And so we always say you have to start with point A if you want to get from A to B, right? And I will say digital transformation by its nature is a full organization initiative. We're not really talking about just upgrading your AMS or just adding in some new email marketing software, right? Digital transformation is a big initiative that's about incorporating probably more than one big platform or software in order to provide, a different or better service or program to members. Another very simple and obvious example is the pandemic, everybody going remote, right? And the reason that even though for years and years and years we said, oh, you can't telework, everybody has to be in the office, you can't do your work well, I can't see what you're up to, you might be in your pajamas at 3 p.m. I don't like that. We said that for years, but then all of a sudden, with a good enough reason, we all went remote within 24, 48 hours, and we made it work. And 18 months later, many of us are still making it work, really well. So the reason that happened is because there was a very strong why, right? If we stay in the office, people might get sick and die. Like that is a really strong, good reason for suddenly, taking on new tools and going remote and figuring out how to do our work remotely. So you need this big, important reason for the digital transformation. But then within that, you also need to understand what culture patterns, which is what we call them, might hold you back. So like my previous example, you might have some silos, you might have some hierarchy issues where only certain people need to know certain information. Well, that doesn't work so well in a virtual world where you have to be intentional about sharing information. Maybe you have people who hoard data, right? Because they don't want other people to touch it and mess with it. Well, in a digital transformation world, you have to get better at sharing data and at doing that storytelling part that I was talking about earlier. So these are all culture patterns, and I describe a whole bunch of them in the white paper. But they're, as soon as you identify these patterns, they're actually really easy to fix. And that's what we call culture plays in a culture playbook. So if you have silos let me just pause for 1 second and say silos are absolutely necessary. We want deep expertise in specific areas. Silos are not a bad thing. Silos are great. What is bad is when silos don't talk to each other, in a way that hinders your progress, right? So, but all you need to do is realize, oh, these departments aren't talking to each other. Let's set up a weekly check-in so that they start, embedding some knowledge about what's going on a fairly regular basis. And I know adding more meetings is not necessarily the thing we all want right now, but that's an example of just a really simple culture play that can actually have huge effects over time of these two departments really understanding their day-to-day work and their challenges, so that when they're both trying to use a new technology for a good reason, they understand each other's use cases, let's say. Anyway, so I'm gonna pause there. Otherwise, I can talk about this stuff all day long. But there's a lot about this in the white paper, of course.
Absolutely. And I think at this point, we are going to go into talking to Prabhash about what's going on at Independent Community Bankers.
Yes, so this is the most exciting part for me always, because we were lucky enough to interview 4 different associations, very different, for the white paper, who have undergone digital transformation really, really well. And the 4 case studies are very different, but I think, don't tell anyone, I think this might be my favorite. Because ICBA went in quite intentionally with the idea that digital transformation not only involved culture change, but was also kind of super holistic. So Prabhash, why don't you introduce yourself again, just briefly, and then can you give us a sense of the context, like what was the problem you were trying to solve?
Good morning. Thank you for having me here, Maddie. Really like that introduction. I am Prabhash Shrestha. Been in the association space for about 25 years. first plug, I will actually absolutely say the work of Maddie and Elizabeth here, that white paper, please download it. It's they have done a phenomenal job in looking at the digital transformation, try to simplify it. And there are a lot of good strategic approach on how we can approach that. It's just fantastic. That's my first advice for the day, early in the morning on a Friday. So, independent community bankers, right? What we do, I mean, there's only, it's only one thing that we do, right? There's everybody on staff, CEO down. We talk about this all the time. We try to create and promote an environment where community banks flourish. And that is something that throughout the staff, we have 160 staff in Washington, D.C. and Minnesota, and also in Tennessee. But we also have 5 for-profit subsidiaries under the ICB umbrella. And each one of them are, profit making pretty good size. And one of the for-profit subsidiaries, a bank in Tampa Bay, which is about $400 million bank, have about 100 staff. So, you talk about the problem, what we're trying to solve, right? When it was brought in 2017, one of the things that we really, truly wanted to see, they changed the title from Chief Information Officer to Chief Digital Strategy Officer. One of the things that they really, truly wanted to do was and kudos to the executive team at that time for realizing the need for this, is to kind of really go through this transformation, digital transformation. In saying that, I love your intro, Maddie, about Dr. Jeannie Ross. I actually have spoken with her a couple of times as well. Phenomenal person. We actually took a page from her philosophy of the digitization and the going digital, exactly the same way you explained. And we actually, when I wrote a chapter on that principle, professional practice in association management, that is the theme of my chapter as well, right? So I think a model that we can use. There are very different types of models those are out there on the digital transformation, and those are the 2 that we actually followed. How do we actually go digitize as well as the becoming digital? Going back to the problem, it was not a problem per se, but we actually wanted to intentionally inherit this journey, the digital transformation journey. And the need for that was the realization that the customers out there, we have to meet the customers where they are. Everything started with our bankers, the customers who are in the ecosystem. We look at not only our members as our folks that we work with, but also the prospect, which all associations do. Beyond that, we also look at, all of the players in that ecosystem, whether they're the financial technology companies or a company that actually will help a bank in various things and so on and so forth, almost like in a platform economy, meaning that we allow everybody to come and play that space, right? And that was the idea that we wanted to go forward with. And in doing so, in creating this map of digital transformation journey, we really truly did not know what all of the end goals would be, but we went in with a very open, intentional mind of learning that design thinking, really truly understanding the bankers and what they need and what we have already provided and what the gap was, so that can we play in that gap. Right? That was the whole idea of our journey, right? So on the digitization front, we focused quite a lot on the internal operation excellence that you talked about earlier. Just an idea for the audience here is we had about 76 servers on-prem. So it was a mini data center, if you can imagine, right? And we had tons of other technology, distributed satellite databases all over the place on people's computers that, as you mentioned earlier, various databases that others did not know. We have those big silos. I think, to your point, there still are some, but we have been able to create those big glass windows. In some cases, shatter those windows too, right? To kind of be able to talk about those. And, again, I think the idea here, again, more and more was exactly that. Well, what could we do? Can we change the company to, make decisions in a connected model of decision-making process, right? Contextual and continuous decision-making process. And we wanted to make sure that a lot of that happened collaboratively with all the departments coming together with data as one of the intel, right? And I think that was one of the major things that the journey was. So that's how we started. 4 years later, I think I'd like to say that we're in a much better place. If you were to ask me, put a gun in my head saying that are we done? No way, absolutely not, right? There's much more to go, but there are many stories that we have built along the way.
Yeah, so tell us more about the specifics. Like you talked about data, so that was one piece. Like what else, specifically was part of this digital transformation initiative in the last 4 years?
Absolutely. So I will focus on data. Before I touch on the data, I'll touch on a couple other things. I don't know how much time we have. I will make it short. So, I think being an association, to make it contextual for us for this particular, setting here, I think the number one focus was, again, our bankers and potential customers, right? The Blue Ocean strategy. You work with, when you talk about the growth, you talk about growth in either the product growth, service growth, meaning that how do we make them better, or we look at the new market, meaning that the market that we have not penetrated before. And in those two cases, we absolutely wanted to make sure that we were intentional again. And so when you look at the membership department, when you look at the education department that all associations do have, events, advocacy, Marcom, right, finance, you name it, right, every innovation, HR, every department, we actually form this partnership in a way, so that we work with every, there's a department chief. And again, because it was a top-down approach, I'm not a big fan of top-down approach in many things, but when you have to have something mandated, that it has to be a culture, change over time. This is something that has to come from top down. I have a phenomenal CEO, very, very smart. The executive team is completely digital. I'll tell you more about that, if we have a little bit of time. And then going back to the specific of the data, one other thing, again, I think you said it so beautifully at the top of the hour is, that we have to be very intentional about bringing data together. And that just does not happen accidentally, right? You have to really, really form that partnership within the departments and really, really want to show them what's the value of the work that we need to do to bring it all together. And I think that's the key. Once you are able to talk with, event departments saying that if you have the data, these are the kinds of things that we can do. We can look at the 3, 5, 7, 10 years worth of, the past data. And we can probably do some of the, the propensity modeling or something along that line to see if we were to do in this particular geographic area, this could be the range of registration numbers that we can get or the number of revenue, right? The range could be this, which allow them to plan and what have you. And that's the planning phase. On the execution phase, when you actually decided, go with it, what kind of marketing that you can do when you don't have the registration number as it should be. And we have a phenomenal marketing department, very digital. They will come take a look at the data, saying that these are the kinds of things that we can do. So these are the pictures that we painted how we can get better. So we did the same thing with every single department like that, how it could be so helpful. And there was almost like a movement, data culture movement in ICBA. So what we have done now, as I mentioned earlier, right, we went from 76 on-premise servers to all cloud. We have 0 servers. And because of that, it has been phenomenal how we can centralize something called ICBA Secure Data Cloud. We are building this massive data repository that we did not have 3 years ago. And this data, we are bringing all the transactional data from everything that we have, our internal, different applications and software. As you all know, there's a huge application proliferation in association. We have all siloed, systems, which is something that you touched also beautifully earlier. And then we also started looking at the data on the public domain, right? What data, again, members being our number one thing, customers being our number one thing, what data could be helpful to our bankers? And bankers in their pain point for their customer acquisition, for understanding the census data around their locality, how can they better do their cybersecurity, compliance, regulatory work, and so on and so forth, really, really understanding their pinpoint, and started going intentionally the data that's available on the public domain from the census, labor, FDIC, you name it, right? And then going beyond that, we also have been buying a lot of data now because we can, and then bringing the data together. So that data, A, we're using internally for our decision-making process, and B, we are kind of leveraging that data for our members, how we can use that data for them for free. And if non-members or other players in the ecosystem want that data, there's absolute opportunity for us to monetize that. Which Elizabeth's thing, right? She wants to make money. I do too.
Well, and
no money, no mission.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What I love, so obviously your association is large, right? And you have lots of subsidiaries and all of that. But I think that the things that you're talking about actually apply to any size organization. We talked about it earlier, but being more data centric in terms of sharing data, that you don't have to be, however many people you have. You can do that within, a small association. Of course you can. Understanding your members' pain points. We should all be doing that, right? No matter how tiny or huge our association is. And then this idea that you had support from the top And I think that's actually a really critical point that I want to dig into a little bit more, because that is also true of culture change. Much as I would love if you could, you really cannot do culture change without support from the top. It just doesn't work. So, and digital transformation, because it's a whole organization thing, same. So tell us a bit more about, your leadership and, how they were involved in all of this.
Oh God, what a great question, right? I think you're so right. And I think both of you said earlier, while technology is absolutely super important in this digital transformation, I think even more important is that, intentional to actually adopt to the ecosystem and the needs of the ecosystem, the market expectation, the customer expectation is so key. And that culture change that you talk about just won't happen overnight. I think it's a culture change, in my opinion, it's collective. I think over time, 2, 3, 4 years, we adopt some of the new things, we do it over and over again, and suddenly 2, 3 years later, you see that the change has happened. And that is so key for the digital transformation, right? Talking about the leadership team now, right? So when I was hired in late 2017, I was hired as Chief Digital Strategy Officer, as I mentioned, right? So then after that, we have hired a Chief Financial Officer, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Human Resources Officer, right? And I think one of the things that has happened with that is there was a lot of input. And as I mentioned, our Chief Staff Officer, as well as our CEO, being very digitally focused, understanding the need. And there was a huge input. I was asked for a huge input on how do we go forward on some of these hire, right? And I would always have this pager, 2-pager, and saying that these are the qualities that we should absolutely look for. I'm not saying that that was it, but there was a lot of thing in there that was built in. So talking about the support from the leadership, I think the CEO, I talk with my chief staff, CEO all the time about some of these changes that we need. And I think they get it, right? I think sometimes I'm lucky in that sense, but in some other cases in association, as you know, Maddie, that we have to have that chat with our executive management team. Everybody has to on board with this understanding that the world around us is changing and changing for good. And especially somebody mentioned in the chat that, because of the pandemic, it has really, truly changed. And I think if we want to meet where our customers are, this change is absolutely needed. And that adoption, acceptance of digital transformation mentality, data culture mentality, digital mentality all across, that is something that I've been very blessed, because in my previous employments, I used to have a lot of these chats of really, truly, almost, it's kind of not trying to be negative or anything, but, educational, that why these changes needed. But in the support standpoint of view, it's just we're in a very beautiful place at ICBA right now, because that focus is there. My chief marketing officer will come to me. We will have chats for hours saying that these are the kinds of things that we should be doing on the digital front, rather than doing this, traditional. Let's not avoid all the traditional marketing style that we're doing, because there are many folks who are affected by that. But these are the ways how we can actually do a lot of social and other campaigns, and very targeted, and so on and so forth, right? One of the last advocacy effort, we created about 700,000 reactions or actions to the call for action. So these are the kinds of things that we're doing. So there's across the board, even our CHRO, even Chief Human Resource Officer, even our CFO, we talk about digital all the time. So this is almost like a DNA of ICBA. So the great support makes my life a lot easier, Maddie.
Yeah, for sure. So we definitely want questions from the audience for Prabhash. I know there will be some. So please, think about your questions. You can post questions in the chat. You can also just raise your hand, I believe, Karen, and then we can call on you to unmute yourself. But yeah, would love some questions. But in the meantime, I have a actually side question. Just in what you were talking about, is how do you, it seems like there's so much possibility for new activity, but how do you kind of stay focused? Like, because if there's so much possibility, I'm the kind of person who likes to start like 27 different things and then I get bored of them. So, like, I can tell you're like that too. So, but if like, that's the beauty of digital, is it's always evolving. There's always new tools to try. There's always new stuff. So how do you kind of keep it focused within a strategy, I guess?
So I will, again, quickly, I won't take too long here. I know that we're against time here. So, I think one of the things that we do at ICBA is IT. We meet with each one of the department at the least once a month. And if not, twice, many of the departments will meet twice a month, right? Kind of to look at just this intentional, pausing, reflecting, looking at what we have done and what needs to be done, kind of mode, very agile approach. And in that, we also, allow the democratization of the innovation, if I may say, right? So there's a continuous thinking of what else can we do? And those what else can we do is not based on the technology. Again, something that you and Elizabeth said at the top of the hour. It is more on, we had this interaction with a member, right? We actually talked to this prospective member. We actually did, some of the, brainstorming, and these are some of the ideas that we think is going to help our member. And this is something that we can play in. We cannot play in everything, right? We cannot be 22 feet wide and inch deep. That's just not going to work. We may want to have to focus on things that we can really truly make impact on. And what happens is we have this catalog of ideas that we have. And intentionally, we go with each one of the department. The ideation, these ideas, they come about. And as part of the budget processing, we actually go through the planning for the following year. So like in this case, right now, in the end of October, we actually have a plan for what we're going to do in 2022. That's something that's shared with every single department transparently. So everybody knows, and these ideas don't come from IT. Again, to your point earlier on the digital transformation, right? It comes from the departments because they talk to, we kind of become the orchestrator in a way of this digital transformation movement. But I think we work with everybody, and then that priority is set. When that priority is set within the IT department, we look at our capacity. We are 60, 70, 80%, depending on which staff person that you look at. So we deal with the known knowns per se, right? Because it's very hard when you don't have priority and focus. So, and then we leave some slack time for each one of the staff person to make sure that we can, react to the things that come about during the year. Going back one more step. I think, and this is because so transparent process, because we have such good dynamics going on with each one of the department, and the focus of the association is kind of the front and center. Everybody knows what we're doing from the digital standpoint of view, whether it's marketing or human resources or our education and event, another phenomenal department, by the way. Well, our every department, they know exactly what's going on. And if we need to make some shift, that comes about as well. So that's how we, stay in the lane, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so that actually leads perfectly into Stephen's question, which is, how does a small staff association manage the digital transformation process? And I was actually going to ask the same thing, like, what's your advice, for the audience for how to start?
Yeah, so I don't think it has to do with the number of staff, or I don't think it has to do with the budget size, and I think the first thing is Rome was not built in a day, right? I think that's how I use that analogy quite a lot. And I really truly believe in that as well. I think I really truly also believe in order for us to move forward very nicely with a lot of energy and excitement and enthusiasm, there has to be quick wins. So I think one of the things that I will suggest is, having this discussion as a first step, saying that what are the pain points of our members or our customers, and where we can play, which can have a lot of impact with a less cost. Going through that exercise, understanding these are the 7 things that we can do towards that journey, creating some goals, and on the journey, it's a journey. I have to repeat that over and over again, and then creating some milestones, right? And getting some of those quick wins, which will energize a team, the whole association, even the small staff, and then propel that forward, right? I think that's one of the things, right? Where can you make the most impact for our members? By introducing, one of the stats now that we know is what 76% of the folks want their customer service via digital channel, right? When it comes to millennial, they're saying that 90% of them won't engage with any other channel but a chat service or mobile app or something along that line. I'm not saying this is a solution. This is one idea. Is that something that we can take upon? Low cost, high impact. What else could be? Could we look at the data that we talked about earlier? Are there opportunities for us, groups to come together, different departments to come together, centralizing some of that, creating some intel out of that? Not only a dashboard that kind of shows where things are, which is very important, but taking it further to the kind of diagnostic data model or even the predictive data model to see What can we do with that data, right? Those are the little steps. Building the architecture, building the infrastructure is key. Those are the steps that small associations can take steps towards, so that everybody's aligned, kind of brings the group together. They all understand the mission and vision of what is trying to, and then I think those are some, and again, it doesn't have to be a lot of money. This is a mindset change, it's a culture change, and I think the approach could be that, right? Looking at the data systems, the processes more than anything else. What can we do to better provide that educational delivery medium for our members? What can we do to have our members or even customers engage in our platform? Little things, can we do those kinds of things for low cost, high impact? Those could be the things that can get started for that static inertia. And I think things can propel, but at the planning, assessing is very important.
I wanted to highlight something that Sherry mentioned in the chat, because I just think this is great. She mentioned we've gotten great cooperation and assistance from the IT departments from some of our larger members. And a couple of things strike me about this. One is, as I mentioned back to her, that's one of the things that makes associations unique, right? Is we do have those deeper, more persistent, more long-term, more involved relationship with our members. And so that gives us access to some things that for-profits do not have access to. So I mentioned that this white paper that, the OBS Guide to Digital Transformation was number 13 in the Spark series. And one of the earlier white papers that I had written was about member-centric engagement. And that's exactly what Sherry is highlighting here is, there are keys to creating member-centric engagement, which is it's a much richer, much more vital, much more sticky kind of engagement than a lot of the ways we tend to think about things. And this idea of working collaboratively with your members and bringing them in to your processes and bringing them into program, product, and service development and using their expertise is one of the things that creates those really strong, really sticky ties and helps you get a better sense of what their worlds are actually like. And this is a huge, huge advantage. Now, obviously, not every single one of your members is going to want to be in that position of basically beta testing for you, because not everybody likes that. But some of them do, right? And the key is to find those people and those companies that are willing to help you like that and make use of it. Okay. So, and then Stephen mentions, of course. Yeah, go ahead, Maddie.
No, I was just actually going to make a similar point, which is that small staff associations all have committees, right? Committees and councils and volunteers. So you actually do have staff. They're just not paid, right? But there's people who do stuff for the organization. And the more you can involve them, I mean, just like Elizabeth is saying, the more you can get some of these changes made, which is always for them, right? It's for the community around the association that you're doing these things. Otherwise, what would be the point?
Go ahead, Prabhash. I have a question for you too, but go ahead.
100% agreed, right? I think, I have been part of smaller associations in the past as well. And I think, that the hardest thing that I've felt in the past is that, the static friction, like how do we get started? That's where, it's the toughest job. But once we are able to have at the, executive level, that this agreement that this is something that we need to do for the future of the association, as well as how we actually really truly work, provide services to our members, and how do we exist in future in being relevant, right? I don't like to use the word relevant. By the time we use relevant, we're already behind. But my point is that, if we do not think about the future of the association, how it's going to operate in the ecosystem, then we are going to be behind. And for the sake of the future of the association and our members, we have to have that discussion and go through that planning, even in the small association, by taking smaller steps. That's going to make high impact. And that if we can get over that static friction, I think a lot of things can be done. And I love Matt's comment about the, our volunteer committee members and so on and so forth. Spot on.
So Prabhash, I have a question for you. This all sounds like really positive, and it was awesome, and it was fun, and it was great, and everything worked great. And I'm sure that wasn't 100% the case. So what was something that was hard about the process, or a challenge that you faced, or a barrier that you had to overcome, and how did you do it?
Well, what a great question, right? So yes, it was not all that easy. It still is not, right? This is again a process, and the journey continues, right? I think one of the biggest, obstacle, I would say, was to really do that, right? I mean, whether it's within IT department saying that this is where we are going, right? Sometimes when you think about, when you dream big and this is what we ought to do, and the staff have been there for a long time, it's hard to convince that. They may say yes to the meeting, but it has to be something ingrained to their heart saying that this is the right thing for us to do. So that was one huge challenge. Then when it comes to when the rubber hits the road, right, when you actually need to get the work done, it's really hard, guys. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this, right? Working with each one of the department, talking about that data, where the data is, how do we get the work done? The resource management, project management, right? The expectation management, it becomes really, truly difficult, but it has, we have to make all staff part of that so that they all are part of it. And that's one way to kind of deal with that. And then working with, system enhance, this is a little technical side of things, right? System enhancements, a lot of work that's needed. The vendor selection piece that you both talked about so nicely, how do we actually partner with them on the strategy and the execution both, right? And how do we actually get some help on the strategy side of things? One of the things that smaller associations can also do is get that, if you don't have in-house staff who can help you with this, spend a little bit of money. It's going to be so worth it, because somebody, folks like Elizabeth, Maddie, and others also, they can come in and help with some of these things, and what is possible and what direction that we can go. So we use a lot of more than strategy side, because I did a lot of strategy with my, other executive management team and, some staff. So that's also how do you work with, the vendor partners and so on and so forth. Another thing that I will say is the talent acquisition, talent retention, talent management, talent development. That's also very important, right? One of the things that's very hard is to find the good digital talent. And sometimes when you want to go through a journey like this, and this is not going to be popular, something that I'm going to say here is, you have to look beyond with very intentional of looking for digital talents, but who can come and help, right? Sometimes just because we have loyal staff, which I am a big fan of and always be very grateful, but that new spark that sometimes that we need, and sometimes that comes with a new talent that we hire. And that always is not always popular, as you all know, because there could be restrictions, there could be financial restrictions of hiring new staff. Or on the other side, sometimes you may have to let go of some of the old talent, which is phenomenal, but it's not timely anymore, right? So those are the difficulties that you have to kind of go through. The planning, the execution, working hard 11 o'clock in the middle of the night. Yes, those becomes almost a norm for some of these initial, work and what have you. But if you're all up for it, if it's not personal, it's not real, right? For me, that's how it is. Mm-hmm. And I think, if you can get that also with the staff, an association, especially some of these, there's a lot of rewards at the end, is how I feel. And these are difficulties that no different than any other association. And then there's the technology itself, right? Technology implementation, technology architecture, data. How do you go from one step to another step to, how do you mature the models that we have? How do you go through the digital transformation maturity model? How do you go from the data maturity model, so on and so forth, explaining that, carving out, having a vision in black and white, not just on the talking what we're trying to do, painting that, making people understand that this is where we are going. Those could be difficult, right? These are the challenges. It still is, right? I think, but we continue through it, bringing all of the departments together, right? I think those are the challenges that we have, but something that we ought to face and just deal with them.
Yeah,
so
I will say that actually, big associations have a harder time with this internal communication and transparency and information sharing. So small associations have a huge advantage in that sense. So please don't think that if you're a small association, you cannot do this. That's not true.
As a matter of fact, I will say it may be actually easier.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
resources are a little tighter, but the culture change piece can be a lot easier. Yeah. And so, okay, we've got about 10 minutes left, and Maddie and I promised we were going to leave you with like, okay, so this all sounds great, like, but what do I actually do? So now we're going to talk about that for a minute. Let me go back to screen sharing. Here we go. Okay, so how do I get started on all of this, right? The first step is you have to assess where you are now. And that's both on the tech side, on the sort of digital maturity side, and also very, very importantly on the culture maturity side. If you have no idea where you are, you're not going to be able to figure out where you're going or how you're going to get there. You need to know where you are right now. The second thing, and we've talked about this throughout, and Prabhash highlighted this, and the data supports this. You know, I mean, this is 100%. You've got to secure leadership support and a funding commitment. Now, again, that gets to the small association, big association, right? A big association is going to be able to secure a bigger funding commitment, but you know, you've got to have both paid and volunteer leadership support behind this, because, you know, and Maddie will talk about this and has throughout, culture change has to have support from the top or it's not going to work. You know, we all like to talk about what kind of bottom up kind of stuff that we can do. And there's a lot that you can do in a bottom up way. Culture change is not one of those things. You're going to need to identify strategic areas where digital technology could make a difference. You know, when you think about those technologies that we identified as being a part of digital transformation, you know, whether it's AI or whether it's, you know, mobile technology or whether it's the cloud or whether it's data analytics, like Prabhash has been talking about, right? You've got to look at your organizational strategy and identify spaces where you could accelerate your progress on your organizational strategy by using technology. You are going to have to review your legacy systems and processes. That whole, you know, digitizing versus going digital thing, you have to digitize first. You're not going to be able to go digital in a member-facing way until you've got your internal processes, you know, in the 21st century. You know, so if you're not there yet, there's some pre-work you have to do. You're going to have to recruit your team. And again, we've been talking about this throughout. Digital transformation can't be the project of IT or the project of membership or the project of marketing. It has to be a project of the organization. So you're going to have to work cross-functionally. And when you're thinking about who are the right people, you want to think about people who are going to be able to get on board with all this. You have people in every functional area in your association, just like you have people in your membership who are going to be excited about this stuff and are going to be, you know, sort of ready to embrace it. Bring them onto your team. They're going to be your evangelists to all those different, very important, focused expertise program areas. You're also going to have to get comfortable with experimenting. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier in the chat. You know, that was actually one of the positive outcomes of the pandemic is we had to move from this, oh, I don't know, maybe, as you know, I'm not sure if we can do this, blah, 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 kind of mindset that we've often had to, oh, we're doing it right now, and here's how it's going to go. And we got a little bit of grace from our members in this period of like, hey, like we know they're trying a bunch of stuff and it's not all going to work, and like we're just all going to go with it and work together and hope for the best. Let's keep that, you know, like thinking about things, the positive changes that we want to persist. Let's keep that mindset, right? Where, you know, we're willing to experiment, we're willing to put stuff out there that maybe isn't 100% ready for prime time. You're not necessarily going to give that to everybody, right? You're going to need to, much like you need to find your internal team that's willing to you know, push things and be a little future focused. You need to find your team among your volunteer leaders and your members who are willing to do that as well. Those are the people who are going to help you experiment. And turning it over to Maddie, right? This is key. You got to improve your culture management. Maddie, did you want? Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I lost my mouse. Yeah, so you know, just know where you are with culture. Take a culture assessment. We have one at Propelled, of course, that we think is the best, but it doesn't matter which one you do, just figure out where you are and then figure out where you need to be in order to be able to be more digital and to, you know, do some of the things we were talking about, sharing information better internally, breaking down some of those silos in very specific ways that help the organization.
So we have time probably for one or two more questions if anybody has them before Prabhash, Maddie, and I each kind of share like our final thought, like the, you know, like the one thing that we want you to take away from this. So anyone have any additional questions for Prabhash or for either Maddie or me? Oh, Prabhash just mentioned something really good in the chat. Associations are not necessarily very good at sunsetting or purposeful abandonment. And I think, yes, oh man, you know, zombie programs that are out there, you know, because they were somebody's baby at some point. And now you just can't kill them. And, you know, when we think about the resource question, that is critical, right? You know, it's absolutely, you know, Philip mentioned staff are still attached to them. Volunteer leaders are still attached to them, right? Like when this was like the baby of the board chair of whenever, and like because of that, for, you know, like we're like, oh, we can't kill it because, you know, make that person mad, whatever. You know, you've got to kill your darlings. You got to be willing to kill your darlings. You know, particularly when they're no longer serving, because, you know, as we talk about this whole thing of freeing up resources, that's one of the ways you do it. Yeah. You know, I hope y'all are paying attention to what Prabhash is putting in the chat, because these are some gems, people. Yeah, absolutely. Measure impact, review your programs. That makes space for new innovation. Boy, and that, you know, that gets us down like a whole nother discussion of like, you know, data influenced decision making, which is exactly what ICBA is doing. Is, you know, they're using their data in innovative ways to do exactly that. Yeah. Okay. Once more for the good of the order before we go to our final thoughts. Going once, going twice. Okay. So if you remember one thing from this presentation, Prabhash, what is the one thing that you want people to remember from this presentation?
Mine is very simple, right? It really, truly is. And it's no rocket science. It's just like we have to look at the world from our members' lens, right? We have to look at what do they do in their day-to-day lives, right? What is their ecosystem? You know, whether it's whatever space that they're in, right? What are their pain points? Are we attempting to understand what that is? What are their issues? Yeah, right. We cannot do, again, I think we cannot do everything for our members, right? Because then we will not be doing a good justice to the programs and products that we have. Let us act on the opportunities. The moment, the other side of the, you know, issues and problems is the opportunities, right? What opportunities we have, right? And where can we play as an association? How can we help them? Let's focus on that. That's my nugget.
Maddie, what's your one thought that people should keep with them?
Yeah, so mine is that you're in a digital transformation right now. The pandemic has forced us all to be in a digital transformation. So you know how to do it. You're doing it. But you know that this one was kind of imposed upon us by external circumstances. Like, you know, the next step is how can we do it intentionally?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And my final thought for everybody is beware shiny object syndrome. It's really easy to get really excited about really cool technology, particularly when you're sitting there with the vendor and they're getting you all excited about like how you can change the world with their new thing and it all sounds awesome. And, you know, but if you haven't done the work to deeply understand your culture, to deeply understand your members and other audiences, their day-to-day operating environment, the challenges they're facing, what they're trying to accomplish, the things that cause them to want to associate in the first place, you know, you're setting yourself up for failure, potentially a very expensive failure. One of the things we cite in the white paper is the Harvard Business Review in 2018. $1.3 trillion was spent on digital transformation initiatives, and of that, 900 billion was wasted. And we definitely do not want you to be that guy. So once again, I'm putting this in the chat as well. so that you will not be that guy, download the white paper, check it out. It's got more of Prabhash's story. It's got stories of other associations doing really cool, innovative, interesting, member-serving, member-facing kinds of things in their digital transformation initiatives. It's got more information about the background of all this, about how you get going. It's got a tremendous list of resources to help you. So yeah, go forth and do good things. And this is how you find all of us afterwards. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you all. It was so great to kick off our conference with this conversation and kind of have that big picture view of, what is digital transformation, and then zoom into some specifics from ICBA's experience. And definitely check out the white paper. The link's in the chat. It's also in Homebase, so if you need it later on, it's there as well. So thank you all for joining us for our first session. We're going to take a little bit of a break until 10:15, and we're going to zoom in actually on one of the topics that came up a few times in this first session, really the communications piece and the importance of communications across silos and functions. So we'll be back here at 10:15 for closing the communications gap in a distanced workplace. So feel free to stick around here if you'd like. Definitely go back into Homebase and say hello to our exhibitors and sponsors. Thank you again to all of them for their support of this year's conference and for joining us. And we'll see you all in about 15 minutes.
That's close.
What's that?
I realized when I turned my camera on how close my computer really was.
Oh.
I was like, no one needs to see that.
Come on, Karen, get closer. That's all right. This morning, Julie and I were putting on virtual lipstick.
So I finally, after our discussion yesterday, I figured out the whole virtual video filters.
Oh, you did? So oh, look at you, a TV star.
I didn't realize how awesome this was.
Yeah, I love that one where you're like a piece of art. I think that's really cool.
I definitely had to update my Zoom though. So
I did get that done. Cool. So that's so funny that last conference, Propel, we do some joint work with Propel.
Oh,
Stuff.
that was a really good presentation.
Was it? Crap. I'm sorry I missed it. I hope I don't disappoint.
Let me stop.